everyone, and welcome to Profiles Collectors Club. And thank you so much for coming. Thank you to Prestige Imports for hosting us in their beautiful showroom. We hope you guys have enjoyed checking out some of the supercars that they have on display, as well as watches by Timepiece Trading, jewelry and diamonds by Susan Blake. And thank you so much to our other sponsors, Blue Scarpa, VIP Hard Seltzer, Zero Caviar, which is plant-based caviar, and it's really delicious, Pura Vida, Quartzology, Art Life, and Dezer Development.
Hey guys, so if everybody could keep it down a little bit, we have some really cool panelists tonight, and it was very hard to put this group together, but they're some of the automotive icons. So if you guys could keep it down so that we can hear them, that would be great. So for the panel tonight, first we have John Temerian of Curated. John, you're up. So we have John Temerian of Curated. They're a vintage supercar dealership down in Coral Gables. And we have Gil Dezer. He's the developer of Bentley Residences, and he developed Porsche Design Tower.
I'm supposed to sit here?
Anywhere you want. If you're not familiar, Gil actually has the patent on the Dezer, which is the only car elevator right now operational in any residential project. Our next panelist is Brett David.
Woo! Sir? See my boy?
Brett is the CEO of Prestige Imports. And we have Avery Andon, who is the owner of Art Life. And they are the only online blue chip art dealership. So if you haven't had a chance to check out in the back, he has a bunch of Warhols, Alec Monopoly, other cool pieces. So Brett is going to lead the discussion over here. Thank you guys for coming. And remember, please keep it down because this is a great panel here.
So guys, first off, welcome home. And is everyone having a good time so far? One more time for those that are straggling in the back. Is everybody here having a good time so far? Welcome home, guys, to Prestige Imports, Lamborghini Miami, Pagani Miami, and the list goes on. The gentlemen that are up here on the stage with us today, to get everybody together in one spot to talk about a mix of different things, the hypercar market, the luxury car market, the art market, and real estate, you can understand that there's direct correlations between every single one on the stage. Every single one on the stage. Between Mr. Gil Dezer and what he has done with his incorporation of automotive style and design with real estate, and he has not only done it once, but he is now doing it a second time, it was a perfect fit to have him up here to talk not just about the luxury automotive side, but the concept of what's happening in Miami with real estate and, of course, the rest of the country. Same situation with John up to my left. John Temerian started We Are Curated, which today, and you guys all know what Curated is, John has a specific gift and an incredible, incredible talent to go and source and find some of the craziest cars the world has ever seen. A lot of these cars are a lot younger than most of us that are in the room today. And what he's been able to do and curate and create a brand, no pun intended with the name Curated, but what he's able to do by developing a brand was connect like-kind car guys from all across the world, but not focusing on modern and futuristic sports cars, focusing on more of the vintage and heritage sports cars, which every single one of those incredible cars tells an incredible story. And that's one of the heightened, beautiful, beautiful things about the Curated team and what John has done under his leadership. Avery and I have gone back for years. Avery's an incredible, incredible man. And as you heard what Dimitri mentioned about being the first online web art dealer, there's a uniqueness to that, and we're going to touch upon that later tonight. When we talk about art, the last 2 years, we've thought about NFTs, and we have lots of questions and comments about NFTs and other elements in the digital world. But Avery's focus isn't just that. it is also some of the rarest pieces from across the world being brought to you in a more modernized footprint, in a way that any of you guys can look at art and view art in a different way than walking in with a curator or into a gallery. I want to say
He
thank you.
sells it better than I could.
There you go, baby.
Right, I was like, he's our new PR agent.
Brett can sell anything.
Doesn't stop, doesn't stop. So one of the things I wanted to talk about, Gil, when we talk about real estate and automotive, a lot of people look at the Porsche Tower as the first development concept that you did and ask why. Why Porsche? And a lot of people in the room don't necessarily know about some of the craziest features of the building and what you and your family did to procure that.
Okay, well, why Porsche? Well, why Porsche? We were doing, I don't know if you guys remember, but back in 2008, there was a real estate crisis, and I had just finished. Hey, everyone in the back.
Guys, we have a legend talking. Let's quiet down in the back.
So we had a real estate crisis in 2008. There were thousands of apartments everywhere in Miami, and we said if we're going to keep on building the same thing over and over again, we're never going to sell anything. So let's change the game. We heard that Porsche was looking to do a building, and we said, well, what does Porsche have to do with real estate? And we said, let's make the car for the car lover. And that's where the idea came up. It started as a simple idea, put the car in an elevator, and then of course from there morphed into what it became, which was a very difficult concept of putting the car in an elevator and bringing it up to the apartment. And what we thought was a cool factor, having the car in your living space, actually wound up being a secondary benefit. We had a lot of celebrities buying in there because they get to live in a condominium in the same way they live in a house. They can come in and go up the elevator and not see a valet, not see concierge, not see security. So it's like living in a single family home in the sky. And it took off like wildfire. It became one of the most popular buildings in Miami. I think everybody knows it passing by. And so now we're doing a repeat with the Bentley Tower. But all the mistakes we made, which you're going to love, we made better. The biggest mistake we made with the Porsche Design Tower was every apartment has 2 parking spaces next to their apartment. And at Bentley, we're doing 4 spaces. So you guys will be able to sell double the amount of cars.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Much needed. And the Bentley building has the same type of concept as Porsche.
It's the same Dezer. We have a patented elevator system, which takes you and inside the car up the elevator into the apartment. If you haven't seen it, go find a friend who lives there and go check it out. It's pretty cool.
And every single unit also has a jacuzzi on the.
But then the other thing that we wanted to really change the game was the living experience. It doesn't get much press or people talking about it, but every single one of our units has an actual plunge pool on the balcony. And so, we thought it was important that if you're going to be having all these things in the greatest hotels you've ever been to, whether you go to Dubai, Maldives, or all these other places that have great plunge pools in your hotel room, why don't we have it in our own apartments? And so we took all the components that we've seen from the greatest hotels around the world, and we stuck it into the apartment. At Bentley, one of the other game changers we're doing is outdoor showers. So from your master bedroom, you can actually walk out from the master bath to an outdoor shower.
I love
And
that.
yeah, so it's another game changer, another way of changing it up and incorporating it with the car world, car lovers, and having a place to display your automobiles in your living room is what it's all about.
Really, really like that. Now, when the concept of automotive came about, there was a ton of different brands that you could have gone to. There's luxury brands. There's, like, you obviously are one of the creators of the Armani. And that was something that is an iconic brand in fashion for so many years.
That's right.
What was one of the reasons when you looked at Porsche, and I know this answer, but I want them to know, there is a long-standing passion that you have for Porsche, correct?
Well, my first car was a Porsche 944 when I was 17 years old. So I fell in love with them, and then they came over. And really, Porsche design, when you started to analyze, really, because we dove into it and we said, what do they have to do with real estate? How do they design buildings? And they explained to us very simply. They said, if you look at the 911, which you have some of these older ones here, the 911 is a car that was designed in the 60s and hasn't changed much till today as far as the look goes. And so that is a timeless elegance that we look for in real estate because these buildings are going to be around forever. And that's exactly what we created. It's a black monolith that goes up in a beautiful curved cylinder fashion. And it's a forever style. It's a forever fashion. It's not something that's cool today and gone tomorrow.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. I remember when we first sat down in your office in Sunny Isles and you discussed it with me. for somebody to have a conceptual idea of this and then to go ahead and bring it to reality are two different things. So I've always told you this. I'm beyond blown away with what you created.
Thank you.
Now to go back and do it for a second time with the Bentley building is going to be insane.
1% inspiration, 99% perspiration.
I'm
That's-
tripping. I'm tripping right now.
That's
Thousands
what
of
it is.
views in here.
That's what it is.
We did not expect there to be so many people. Something's definitely wrong with the AC. JT,
What's up, brother?
when we talk about your passion for what it is you do, can you share with the audience a little bit about your background?
So I would say that our entire business model and the entire DNA of the company is based on what my father and grandfather started years ago. You know, I was very fortunate to grow up in a workshop. And I was very fortunate as a young kid, summers, weekends, after school, I was watching my dad work on Lamborghinis and fix cars, and I was washing cars and sweeping floors. And I would say at a very young age, I'll never forget 1994. He's gonna date me a little bit. I'll never forget seeing my first Lamborghini Diablo SC30.
Unbelievable.
And that changed my life. I mean, I you know, seeing this car, it was purple metallic, which was the famous launch color. And a gentleman by the name of Glenn Marcus, a collector in Boca, gave me a ride, and I just knew at that moment I had fallen in love with the brand. Not just being around the cars as a kid, my dad was working on them, but really falling in love with the car. And I don't think, you know, for years I looked at Lamborghini as a misunderstood brand.
Of course.
And I felt like it was a duty and something in me to share that with the world. And I always felt they were undervalued. So it's become a part of the DNA and sort of, I would say, a part of my life.
100%. And a lot of people don't necessarily know that you and I share a lot of the same similarities in our story with parents that grew up in the car business. You and I growing up, not necessarily playing with toys, but playing with spare parts while dad was working on cars or I was in the parts department. And we grew up with the smell of petroleum surrounding us, fuel surrounding us, and it's in the blood. If I was to ask you today, as we sit here, where we have witnessed Lamborghini go in the past, let's say 10 to 20 years in comparison to some of the more creative and unique pieces, not just from design, but also volume and everything else, what would you say and how would you state in which Lamborghini is going and the rest of the exotic segments that we play with?
So you know, I look around at the room and it's interesting because when I was growing up, I'd go to a car show or I'd go to a gas station with my dad and nobody knew what a Ferrari F50 was. So nobody knew what a Lamborghini Diablo was. And today, because of social media, because of car shows, cars and coffees, video games, all these things, there's a very, very young generation that knows what these cars are. We have young kids walking in the showroom and they're like, that's a Murcielago SV and there's only 44 in the US. So it's really, really impressive to see the brand influence a very young generation. And I think the brand overall, when you look at supercars today and you look at the prices of a Ferrari F40 or you look at the price of a Ferrari F50, you know, I don't know how many people have been following the recent auctions, but an F40 literally just sold an 8,000 mile car 2 weeks ago for 3.5 million.
Wow.
So,
Hey, guys, everybody in the back, if you could be quiet, please. Hello. Guys, hello in the back. If everyone could be quiet, please. We've got a special group of panelists. It's not going to be very long, and then we can get back to the cocktail party. Thank you.
You can go to live later. Everyone pull up here and pretend to pay attention. I'm sick of this shit.
thank you, Avery. Thank you. Well spoken. So really you see a younger generation into these cars, and when you see the prices of these other supercars from the same generation, I think Lamborghini is incredibly undervalued. And in many ways, the Lamborghinis from the 80s and 90s, my personal opinion, had the boldest impact in the automotive world. You know, when you look at what a Countach did in the automotive world, you look at what a Diablo did in the automotive world, I mean, this changed the architecture of all supercars. And I think, listen, you talk to 3 generations today, and everybody looks at the Countach and the Diablo as really cars that changed the world.
The Countach was that one car that I think that all of us grew up with, or it was a Diablo or a Countach, that it was the unobtainable car before social media. You know, if you were to come down to South Florida and hit South Beach, you had an opportunity possibly to see one car. And you guys now understand that today, from the drive from Sunny Isles to South Beach, let's say, you'll pass 10 different Lamborghini Urus SUVs and 3 different V10 series, and it's the same chronological order with Bentleys and Ferraris, etc. But that's because of the market we live in, right? We would like to say that it's Miami. And that could be true. Definitely could be true. But it's not just here in South Florida. It's like this all across the world. The numbers of the vehicles that we're talking about in creation. So go ahead and think about this for a moment. How many Countaches, in your understanding, do you think would be in existence?
There's probably about 1,200 Countaches left. Now, that's an important number because it's 1975 to 1990 was the last car built. Really, 1974 to 1990. So that's a long span. And imagine if there's 1,200 left in the world. I mean, there's probably 1,200 Urus in Miami.
Easy, easy, easy. We're talking about a brand now that has elevated itself from all facets to become not just that crazy sports car, that unobtainable sports car. When Lamborghini first came out and discussed about the Countach into the Diablo into the Mercy, and the Mercy on forward, when the introduction of the Gallardo came out in 2005, 2004 in Europe of the V10, everybody thought Lamborghini was crazy. We would never want a baby Lambo. And it took years for not just the brand, but the markets across the world to truly assume this car. Not many people know this at the time, but when Chrysler was involved with Lamborghini, the V12 engine on that car came as a donor, if I'm not mistaken, from the Dodge Viper, which is really, really nuts. Fast forward a couple years later, many years later, we're sitting in New York and Lamborghini calls us up to go ahead and take a look at a new project that they wanted the dealers to get an understanding of what it was and what our perception of it could be. We walk into the meatpacking district. It was one of Gil's buildings, ironic. And we were sitting there in the room and they unveil this beautiful red Urus. And at the time it wasn't called a Urus, it had a project name. And as we're looking at this, the first thing we're going and thinking and speaking about internally amongst us is, will this work? Could this work? How does this sit true within Lamborghini's DNA? But then you quickly forget that we also had the LM002, the Lamborghini SUV, which at the time was the first time that they had ever packed a V12 into a production SUV that had that much power, that design, that incredible, incredible look and feel. So now as you go back and see today's performance of the Urus, it is one of the best-selling performance sports cars, actually, in a class of its own called super sport utility vehicle, where stuff like the Prolesang, I can't pronounce that funny name.
I don't know.
Songway?
Persongway.
Not a Ferrari guy, so.
Yeah, me neither. The Aston and all of the rest of these little mixes, you start seeing everybody jump into the SUV segment. Obviously, turning around now and looking at this has been an instant success. And that's just on the Lamborghini side. And obviously, that's been a hyper focus from John and also from us being Lamborghini Miami. You know,
If I can chime in.
come on.
If I can chime in. I think the reason, I think the points you're making are completely valid as far as quantities of cars, but the reason you're seeing the cars out there today, the reason you're seeing them out there today and readily available is because today they work. You know, and back then you used to buy a Lamborghini and you were lucky if it started, if it didn't start, whatever the case was. But today these cars are daily drivers. They're fun daily drivers. It's the most fun you can have with your clothes on in a car. And they actually work. Like, and I'm a Porsche guy. I know these guys are Lamborghinis. I've had Lamborghinis before. The reason I like the Porsches the best, and I have my Bugatti outside, Bugatti as well, is because I'm a guy, you don't want to own a car after I've driven it. I beat the hell out of these cars. And most of these cars, Porsche specifically, Bugatti, they can handle it. Lamborghini still, you know, I beat up my Lamborghini, broke it a few times, but you know, it loved it anyway. But today these cars work like your everyday Cadillacs from back in the day that you just start the engine, the windshield wipers work, the AC still works, the stereo works, and that's I'm sure what was the main difference why it's an attainable car. Everybody wanted a Countach then. The price was wow. But then everybody said, you know, I'm going to be sitting in the mechanic's office, you know, every single week. And you don't have that anymore with these cars. They run like everyday modern cars.
I think the other reality, and wow, that was loud. I think the other reality is that, and a lot of people don't realize, Lamborghini was struggling for so many years So there were times, there's a great story in 1979 where a businessman from Boston showed up to the factory and he was there to pick up his Countach. And at the time, the head of the factory basically told him, hey, do you mind going to pay the wheel vendor with cash to get your wheels for the car? Because we owe him money. And we need, you've got to, if you want your wheels to finish your Countach. So they were hand-built cars. Lamborghini struggled for so many years. Obviously, not all of the research and development was always there. And at one point, even, it's funny, I was looking at one of the old marketing plans, and imagine in 1998, which is pretty modern, Lamborghini's entire worldwide business plan their goal was to sell 187 cars in 1998. So it's a totally different company, and you're 100% right, Gil. It's a usable product today. It's something that everyone can enjoy. And I think that because of that, there's going to be a further generation that wants the older cars. If you buy a new Revuelto, one day you might want a vintage X or a Murcielago or something like that. So I think they're building in a future generation of collectors at the same time.
I couldn't agree with you. I think it's easy. There we go. So no, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that kind of drives us into a secondary conversation when it comes on to, I'm not just going to say America, but the world's new forefront in the automotive sector that I know for you and I want to cry, but we've also just talked about it a couple of minutes ago, which is electrification. And the fact that a majority, if not most manufacturers from all around the world decided to join this movement of going electric. And the truth is, I'm the first person to raise my hand that years ago when Elon Musk decided to take over Tesla, because for those that know, Elon didn't start Tesla at the beginning. The original Tesla was started on a lease product donated by Lotus, and that's where the Tesla Roadster came out. So when he had purchased the company and decided to take this over and create this incredible electric car company, at the time, I myself looked at this and said, he's nuts. He's never going to be able to obtain this. It'll never happen. For so many reasons, from the concept of how they described their dealer network, for example, how they launched the designs of their cars. But there's something in today's footprint, and I think that all of us can agree to this, that Tesla, being the leader in the electric field, has almost created themselves to be that electric car company, because we've seen every other manufacturer do it. Porsche, Mercedes, Audi, Kia, Ford, etc. And don't get me wrong, there's been some great sales, but Tesla still dominates the force with something that I would have never believed in. I mean, have you ever bought a Tesla retail?
The reason we never believed in it is because that first Tesla was really a piece of junk.
Absolutely terrible.
So they started off really with the wrong foot. That Lotus thing was garbage. It went 120 miles. You needed to charge it. It was a joke. So that's why I think they started off in the wrong way. Obviously, once they made a better car. I'm on the list for a Cybertruck. If anybody's getting a Cybertruck, I'll pay over. I want it tomorrow.
Now, you're wearing a Bugatti jacket. You came out of your Chiron. If you knew that Bugatti was going to go EV or into the hybrid segment, which I know that is the forefront of what's next to come, how are you feeling about that today?
I was at Pebble Beach when they announced the end of the W12 engine, and it was like a knife through your heart. We're sitting here. It was a momentous occasion because we were there for the invention of this W12 quad turbo, 1,600 horsepower. I mean, it was an amazing thing. And to hear that it's going away, it's kind of sad. But then they're replacing it with something just as interesting, they're saying, and they're going to keep it. The car companies know that they have to still keep it interesting for us, even with all this electric stuff. Which, as far as car sales go, we understand they're not taking well to the market, and battery fires that could happen, et cetera, et cetera. So and as of right now, what I recently learned is that electric cars make up 2.5% of all car sales, which is nothing. So it's not really coming in. They were very happy to say that last year car sales of electric cars doubled. So it went from 1.25% to 2.5%. It doubled, and it will continue to double. But and as the offering goes up, but I don't, we got a long time until it's part of our mainstream stuff where you're going to be forced to drive one.
No, I totally agree, and I think if you really go back and you think about it, buying a car today and looking at it and saying, all right, I want to have my Bugatti because it's a status symbol or its image, you're a prime example of somebody that is the farthest from that.
I have a real question for you guys.
Let's hear it.
So, the first Countach, right, 1974 or 75. You bought a car like that. and today it's worth a lot more. Can you buy that first Tesla, Lotus Tesla, and will it go up in the same ratio and value in the next 30 years from now?
I'm gonna say something really controversial. Brett, I'm sorry. My opinion is the electric cars are the same as your cell phone. It's a disposable. You're gonna upgrade it. You're gonna throw it away. That's my belief. I have to say I was actually really impressed being at Lamborghini factory and seeing what they're doing with the Revuelto specifically, and how they're incorporating, just to meet emission standards, but how they're incorporating the hybrid technology. I think that's incredible. But something like a Tesla, the first, whatever it may be, I don't see the value in the future. I could be wrong. My kids could be laughing at me. But I look at it as the same as your cell phone.
You're on camera. They're going to remember.
I mean, I think the first Tesla might have some collector value. 0001. I mean, I have a Tesla and I have a Lamborghini and a Ferrari, and I drive the Tesla every day. I think it's just a convenience thing, though,
There's something about the Tesla, though, where they create a fan in you, Avery. And the reason I say that is just as what Gil mentioned, and what John had mentioned, when Lamborghini was a much smaller volume brand, we had always gone through those small hiccups with things that were going wrong. And every customer that had purchased, we focus, unlike most dealers, we focus where the customer is always number one, but it's not about just the sale. It's more about the whole ownership experience. And that's something we're going to talk about, of how our business has completely changed from what it once was, where it was just sales driven. But the crazy thing is, and I'll just say this, I had purchased a Tesla prior. I did. I got to be honest with you. And I wanted
Where is it?
It was a short-lived experience. It was a Model X.
What? You bought it because you needed to charge your phone up.
That was it, exactly. I bought a Model X. I got on the hype right when it first came out. But here's the crazy thing. I was so excited to get the car because the entire process was done through the phone. So it made it more of like this informative, exciting order.
Yeah. So through the phone. So I placed this $100 order or $200 order for a Cybertruck, whatever, and they sent me an email. You're on the list. Nobody to talk to. Nobody asked what number am I on the list. When can I expect this thing? It's just impossible. So that it's fun and not fun at the same time.
I couldn't agree with you more, and that's the truth. And then the cars get delivered. You get that text message when there's a problem or an issue. It's just like when you called the computer company. Nobody's there to answer the phone on a 1-800 number. You're talking to a bot, exactly. But then the car comes in, and you start noticing that the Bluetooth doesn't work, and the mirror doesn't work, and this doesn't work, but you're actually okay about it. You're excited about it because you got your new car. That wouldn't happen in a combustion car. That wouldn't happen with the regular stuff that we sell on a day-to-day basis. But that's one of the things I want to go into, and I think, Avery, I'm going to call upon you from the retail perspective, not as a dealer like us, because Gil, as much as he is a consumer of cars, he is so many cars between him and his family. He knows what it's like on both sides of the fence. So as a retail person, I'm going to ask you, what excites you today about Lamborghini or Ferrari? Because I'm going to touch upon something in a second that's going to drive this deeper. Well, your retail experience, because buying a car today is completely different. Were you buying it because of the community that you were assuming into? Were you buying it for the love and the passion for the design, the engineering, and the performance? What was your reasoning and your drive?
Well, like, for instance, when I stepped into the Pista I bought, it's night and day from 90% of the cars on the market. The craftsmanship, there's something about it. When you get in a Ferrari, I think the Urus feels a little more manufactured, but a Pista and a lot of the higher end Lamborghinis, there's something different. It's just, you feel it the moment you close the door. But getting on the retail experience, one of the things that I was going to mention, for instance, a Tesla, you buy it and click through the entire process, the car shows up. On the art side, for instance, we have Art Life, and we are always trying to find a way to sell higher end art in an entirely digital process. And we have found it's just impossible. When you get to a certain price point, people want to talk to someone. They want to reach out and touch a real person. So really our business model, we call it click and mortar, because we get the clicks, we want the consumer from online, but there comes a point in that retail experience, we need to either get them on the phone, bring them into the gallery, look them in the eyes. There does become a point in a purchase at a certain price point that you can't do it all digitally. You need to have that touchstone, that there's a human being there, there's a real relationship, and obviously you and John have that to a tremendous amount. Like, I'm sure John, half of his deals are clients just picking up the phone like, hey man, I just saw this Lamborghini from 1987. I gotta get my hands on it. And you can't replicate that. You can't just put that on a website and replicate that. So I think that in some aspect, there will always be a human point of contact in these deals that we do, at least at a higher price point.
I would agree completely. And I think the proof is in things like, obviously the success of Bring a Trailer has been huge. Bring a Trailer sells, I would say, more classic cars than anyone in the world today. But the reality is, when you look at Bring a Trailer and cars over $1 million or cars over $700,000, they die and they struggle. And you just nailed it. The reason for that is simply because at that price point, someone wants, it's confidence, it's consumer confidence. And I don't think you can get that with just a click on your iPhone. A Tesla is different. But at a certain price point, when you're getting a Pagani Huayra or, whatever it may be, Utopia, it's all about a handheld experience. And people want to be part of the experience, the rallies, the events, all these different things that you guys do. And I agree with you 100%.
And that's actually something that I want to touch upon with you for a second, because when you go back and we think about you searching for the specific Countach, Diablo, etc., you're out there finding one car, and in that segment, there is no two cars alike. None. And that's one of the most incredible things. So if we could fast forward that into today, and here we are talking about the volumes of brands like Lamborghini, Ferrari, Porsche, McLaren that have put big numbers of volumes out for all different models and segments. It brings me upon something else for the elitists that want something different. But I have to tell you something from my experience of being here at the dealership, Gil, and you've joined me for enough of these rallies. There's something very different by being welcomed to a brand and purchasing a car just to purchase it, like I mentioned before, just because it's a status symbol. It's what they live for. They feel that their car is really what is their persona or their ego. And in reality, that's not necessarily something that we go and we fight for. That's not the dream client for us. We want the guy that's the enthusiast. We want that guy that knows exactly what he's getting because he wants to get behind the wheel and actually drive his cars. The collecting aspect is the secondary, but the drive, ownership, and experience of being welcomed to a family and being welcomed to a community is so different. So I look at, for example, what you do at Curated. I'm going to take a little bit of a page at this incredible brand that we have inside the new showroom of Pagani. I have to tell you, we had just opened up this dealership just a couple months ago, and we have been a Pagani dealer for many years. And when you think about the history and the heritage and the backstory of Pagani and where they started, where Orazio Pagani started his early career at Lamborghini, when Lamborghini was in its prime, as John was mentioning, during the Countach days, a quick little side note, Orazio Pagani had a lot to do with the design and inspiration of the 89 Countach Anniversario. And when Lamborghini had told him, and we talked about this recently, when Orazio told me this story, it was incredible. But when he stated at the time that the Italians had told him that there would never be an Argentinian man's name on the side of the car, that's when Orazio went out and sought for something different. And he went out and created a brand called Moda and Design, which obviously transferred into Automobili Pagani. Now, I want you to understand something. The rarity of certain cars is numbers, and it's great. We have 1,500, if I'm not mistaken, Carrera GTs, 918, 918s, 1289 Carrera GTs coming from the Porsche specialist.
66.
966. How many McLaren P1s were there made?
101 or something, no?
Much more than that. The segment of Pagani, when we think about what the Huayra is, We have 100 cars for the world that are bespoke creations. And one of the most incredible things about being welcomed into the Pagani family isn't just about saying that you have a chance to buy a car. That's a small point of it. But the concept with Pagani as the concept of us going back in time and sitting down at the table with Ferruccio Lamborghini and discussing the design of a Countach or a Diablo. And that's what we have, this incredible opportunity with Orazio and the entire team from Automobili Pagani and what they've created. They've been able to create this incredible, I'm not just going to call it a car. They've created a piece of art that extends itself to family, community, events. And that's one of the most unique things about some of these brands. There's a lot of brands today that have become just high volume sports car manufacturers, and high volume in the sense that the numbers are still low compared to Mercedes and other brands, but there's still higher volumes that when we're looking at a Pagani Huayra out of the segment of 3 or 4 years, that there was 100 coupes made. That's it. 100 coupes. And let's say 28 to 31, 32 of them reside in North America. That's it. But when you're welcomed into the Pagani family, you're welcomed in to a community and to a family that's so different than just the regular car owner. You're welcomed on the Pagani Raduno. And the Pagani Raduno is done United States bound and internationally for both sides of the clients.
Well, you know, it's funny. We had a client, we sold an older, now vintage Koenigsegg CCX2. And he gets the Koenigsegg, he loves the car, and he calls us after a few months. He actually calls Gabe, wherever Gabe is, and says, you know what? I love the car, but guess what? The Pagani experience is just incredible. And I love Koenigsegg. I love the brand. But honestly, what he fell in love with is the fact, exactly what you're saying, that he could sit down at lunch with the visionary Horacio, with the team there, and that's super, super special. Now, you can still do that with Koenigsegg, but I think Pagani's done such a great job with the rallies and the one-to-one. And you nailed it.
Some of my greatest friends today, other than you all on the stage, I've met at these Radunos, and it's an opportunity for some of the biggest business titans in the world that you see in TV shows and you read about, and you would never think that you'd have an opportunity to sit in front of. It's amazing that when you take that individual, you and I have done it before on the Pagani rallies, and all of a sudden you get taken out of being Gil Dezer, just the Miami developer, and you're appreciated as Gil Dezer, the car lover, the collector, the aficionado.
I drove a Porsche on the Pagani rally, and I had the fastest car there.
I don't want to hear that. Stop. You did, only until your Pagani is to come. But when you go back and you think about all of that, and you sit down and you're able to break bread on these rallies and share some of the craziest memories, share specs, performance data, and most of these Radunos end up at some of the most iconic racetracks. We're able to have fun and see what these cars can actually do in a proper setting.
Everything he's saying is true, but I do have a counterpoint to this. And it's not that I'm shitting on Pagani or any of these other small manufacturers. I recently, I'm not even going to mention the car, but I bought a limited production car. They made less than 200 of this car worldwide. And then I also have the Bugatti Chiron, which they made 500 or so. And working with like a company like Bugatti, which is really has a bigger company, parent company, it's such a pleasure to own that car, to get it serviced, anything you need. It's right there. It's readily available. They're simple. Having these specialty cars, buyer beware. You have to love it, and you have to love being able to talk to Horacio, because when something's wrong, and it's not necessarily Pagani, I'm saying, it's all these cars, you know? I mean, but when something's wrong, you know, then they got to do this flying doctor business of flying in a mechanic. You don't want to be in that movie, because it's just, you don't get to play with your toy. Fortunately, it's not my only toy. So it's sitting in the garage and you're missing this piece, missing that piece. But it's still annoying that you paid millions of dollars for a car and you got to wait for the flying doctor to tell you what's right or what's wrong. Not to shit on Pagani, because I love Pagani, and Horacio's an amazing guy too. And the new car is sick, but buyer beware with these small production, you know, cars. That's all I'm saying.
One thing I wanted to touch on, talking about production sizes, because it seems like there's a big emphasis with the hypercars, and it's fascinating to me because in art there is a correlation, but I think it's, you guys are talking about the same thing, that aesthetic and human emotion plays such a big part of it as well. A good example is we do a lot of Warhol business, and there are a lot of Warhol editions much smaller in size Then the Maryland. Maryland, the Warhol Maryland is 250 prints. Each color he did 250 of each of them. Now, there's a lot of different Warhol editions that are much smaller edition sizes that sell for a fraction of the price. Maryland Warhol sell for 250 to 350,000 each. And there's 250 of each of those prints. And yet you can have another Warhol print. There's only 50 of them. They sell for 20 grand. So I think it shows that aesthetic and emotion play such a big role in everything, not just cars, but watches, art, across the board. The humanity loves what they love. And it's funny that you can't predict that. And the people that make this stuff can't predict that.
Let me ask you a crazier question. When a family or an individual is able to acquire a specific, unique piece from you, something that was sought after, once that family or that individual obtains that, you find yourself, and you find that client, I should say, carrying that piece within him or his or her family as a legacy piece, because those are the rarity pieces that are rarely ever sold and traded once somebody obtains them, correct?
Well, nowadays, a lot of people are putting their art in trusts for tax benefits. And if you own art, you should all look at this, because you can write off 100% of an art acquisition if it's placed in a family trust. So 90% of the higher end art we sell is going into a trust anyway. So I guess that makes it a legacy piece.
It does.
You know, but yeah, you're right that people buy art to pass down.
And I see it the same with cars. I mean, I can't tell you how many, and Brett, I'm sure you know, especially at the higher end, collectors that are putting cars in trusts or in their own personal museums. But the reality is it's become a legacy piece, and people, it's tax planning, it's family estate planning. But yeah, I agree with that.
You know, for us on the Pagani side, when we talk about the rarity of a piece of art, it's probably one of the least turnover brands in the world when customers are welcomed into the family, like your customer mentioned. Majority, if not all, at least from us, once they're welcomed into the family, they never leave. And when they don't leave, it's not about saying that we take a car and trade into the next. These are families that understand that these are blue chip investments. And having the opportunity to own a rarity piece like this, if you or I could call Michael Staskin from Pagani, who's the president today, and say, Michael, make us a Zonda, and we knew the MSRP price at the time, 600,000 to 800,000, let's say, we would do anything today to make sure we can have that car. And when we talk about a blue chip investment when it comes to values, the Zondas at a time had ranged from MSRP, like I said, 5, 6, 7, 8. And some on the pre-owned market during influx of low droughts in the economy had dropped below. But Zondas are trading hands today, $7, $8, $9, $10, $12, $15 million for specific pieces. So when we talk about a car not being an asset class, it's bizarre. Because when we look at the rarity of having something like that, something so incredibly unique, that family is never getting rid of it. And I've just witnessed through the Pagani world that customers are adding to. They're adding to and curating more Paganis to their collection for so many facets and reasons, not just one.
I'm happy you said that. My girlfriend's in the audience. I tell her every time I buy one of these cars, it's an investment. I'm not wasting the money. She doesn't believe me, but now that you said it, she might believe.
There you go. He's got an excuse. He's got an excuse. Avery, let me ask you a question from art. And I got to go back now, and I'm going to age you 2007, 2008. And for those that are in the audience that remembers the car, how many people remember the Sharpie Lamborghini? You remember the Sharpie Lamborghini? Yep. There you go. You do. So the Sharpie Lamborghini at the time was one of the firsts where we as a dealership decided to pair art with cars. And this was done in 2007 when everybody thought I was insane. You remember me bringing the car to your event. And this is when a local artist who you know, Jonah Serwinski, who's an incredible man, started to do a mural in my home for my father. And as we were outside and we were having a conversation, we discussed the concept of you know, what I was going through and the difficulties in 2007. And I had told him a little bit about the struggle and the stories, because from the outside, everybody always thinks it's milk and cookies. But I went through 4 years of disgusting hardship to make sure that I could stay here at the helm. And we discussed about this car. We talked about it. And I said, you know, how cool would it be to interact art and cars? And we talked about a whole story and a concept.
And it's ironic that at the time, everybody thought I was crazy. Everybody told me I was nuts. How would you ever put a Sharpie marker to a $330,000 Lamborghini? You're nuts. And I stated it was all about a story that I wanted to tell. And today, most manufacturers during Art Basel exhibits are they're all creating art cars. What do you think about the whole art and automotive mix now?
I think that, when it's done in a proper way, it can be beautiful. One of the things I hate seeing now is every year at Art Basel, people are just putting clear bra wraps on cars and painting over it. That's not an art collaboration. That's someone just, painting on a sticker for a week and peeling it off. And you see it because the artists don't put that much care or passion behind it. But when you get a real marriage of art and automotive, it can be a beautiful thing. I mean, I know that you're giving yourself credit in 2007, but the origins of that were BMW.
Jeff Koons.
Back to the 70s with Jeff Koons.
Yes.
When he did
motorsport cars.
Yeah, some of the coolest collaborations I've ever seen on the M3.
And you go back and look at the price points of those today. They're iconic numbers.
Iconic. I mean, you can't buy them now. They're all in museums. But that to me is the origins of cars and art. And even the moment it was done, it was an incredible thing.
You think there's other artists that you have come across, either well-known ones that are still with us today and more modern ones? Is there any synergy that you see that you would love to see with a brand and specific art? Is there one artist that defines a specific car brand?
Well, when we talk about it with car brands, I think that the next frontier, everyone is painted on cars. I think that what I want to see more of is looking into the minds of these artists and letting them get into the interior, let them get into the color palette, let them have decision making in the actual, stitching, every element of the car. So it's a true collaboration.
And it sounds like what you're saying is that the true artist is the one who's actually doing that. The car is a piece of art.
Yeah.
Especially Paganis, you look at them. I'm looking at this McLaren, the SLR McLaren. I haven't seen that car in 20 years. But even that's a piece of art. So the cars by themselves are art. And that's why in our buildings, we like to have them in your living room. And they don't necessarily need to be modified and everything. And those designers who are creating these cars, they're not just art, they're functional pieces of art, because they actually move. And,
I agree.
And I'm a real estate guy. So real estate, we believe in tangible items, and art has this, this ability to fluctuate in price. But when you see a car that had a collaboration of thousands of people to make the car work and function, and it's the most stunning, beautiful thing you've ever seen, that in and of itself is a piece of art. And it doesn't need any extra painting or doodling or anything else like that on it.
It's correct.
No, I agree. I mean, I think today design is a little bit different. But especially years ago, I mean, you look at some of the designers like Marcello Gandini and these guys, they were all 20 years old, 26 years old. The Miura, if you guys know anything about Lamborghini history, was designed by a 26-year-old. So, I mean, you look and you think, I mean, part of what I try to do is help the history and tell the stories of these visionaries and designers. But I agree with you. I think the cars are art. That being said, that Warhol M1 is killer.
That one is a living legend. When you talk about automotive, Gil, and we know what you've done with the Dezer Vader, do you have other insights of stuff that you want to obtain, create with the mix of automotive passion and real estate and development?
I mean, I think we nailed it with having your car as close to you as possible. But it's not, as you can see, it's not about the car. The car is a machine. It's about the people around it, the people behind it, as you were saying, the people you meet. And it's about the people at the end of the day, which are ultimately the people living in our buildings. And they like to live in our buildings because they're around other like-minded car guys. And everybody else in the building, you go downstairs to the restaurant there, and it's a hell of a conversation. And one guy's outdoing the other. And you know the people living in that building from LaFerraris to everything else we have in there, and it gets crazy in there. It's a big competition. So, and they love it. So the idea of camaraderie, the idea of bringing people together, which is what you did tonight over here, it's very nice, and that's what the car world's all about.
I love that. I definitely love that. Avery, when you're talking about in the art world for your next growth and the art industry could be changing as rapidly as the car business, right? Because for us, we're on the forefront of EV. We have the next big segment, which is where does the dealer structure stay or go within the United States? You know, Tesla was the first one to come and disrupt that. What's the next big disruptor that you see in the art world?
Well, we're in an interesting place because I launched the artlife.com in 2014, and we were very early in being a direct-to-consumer e-commerce art gallery. COVID accelerated that, where suddenly every gallery raced to basically catch up to us. And that was a couple years ago. So now every gallery, Gagosian Pace, all of the major players all have dedicated departments to doing exactly what we do. So we're looking at that right now. You know, it is very different and difficult to scale in art. We realize that you can spend more money, but it doesn't necessarily translate to more collectors. I think that's one thing that's different. There are not as many art collectors there are car collectors. So, you know, look, we're looking at AI and ways to better educate people. Imagine if you could go online and, you know, go on our website and immediately get an art history lesson. I think that that's one of the things where people are getting more interested and fascinated. They don't want to just buy something. They want to learn about it. They want to know about the artist. They want to know what they're investing in. So I think that it's not just about scaling. It's about, you know, building a loyal collector and really teaching them what they're buying and making them passionate about it.
Are you focusing a lot on youth? Because obviously as your clients become older, there's a brand new demographic of buyers that are coming up. And art is very sexy when it's understood. And, and the investment side is very great and a very high graded asset when it's understood. Is there any focus on young youth, at least for your brand?
Honestly, I'm lazy, so I still deal with old rich people. But I mean, if I could find a way to get the youth, I'm all about it.
Love that. I really love that. And JT, what about you?
I see it every day. I mean, I see a ton of young people. We've sold Murcielago manuals to 30-year-olds. I think there's a younger generation because of social media and because of that sense you talk about, Gil, that sense of like, you know, brotherhood and meeting and social and talking to people. I think people today through social media, the events, at a very young age want to be around these cars and special cars and have this mindset. I think there's a younger generation that has a mindset of being a collector and being smart with an asset. And I think especially after COVID, like you said, it accelerated things. You know, Bring a Trailer, I bring that up again. Bring a Trailer showed people these assets are liquid. Every day, cars are selling. And it put it in people's face. It's not just Scottsdale RM Sotheby's or, you know, it's not just those big auctions. It's now in your face. It's at the tip of your fingers. Any age can see it. And I think we see a much younger generation of people. Hopefully they translate to art. But I think we see a much younger generation of people just because of the knowledge is at their fingertips.
I gotta say I agree with you completely. I think that the car world has been, you know, pretty much involved in youth since we were kids. The first thing we get are little Matchbox cars, and when we have the ability to play video games, the first thing we play with are the video games. And then we start understanding what a car is, loving the smell of fuel, having the opportunity to see one, and then you just become completely engulfed in love, and you say, all right, this is the future, this is what I want. And, you know, it's funny, there's a gentleman here in the crowd today named Fred, and Fred is a notorious car guy. And Fred is one of those guys, for example, that isn't a guy that buys his cars for status. He buys his cars because he drives, and he's able to go on these rallies. He's actually, one of his businesses is Gold Rush, if I'm not mistaken, correct? And Gold Rush is the United States version of what Gumball is, but in a much different way, in a much more redefined way, and the clients that they put together. And one of the things when I asked Fred, I said, you know, Fred, when you go on these rallies and you bring these cars, what is the, you know, exciting thing? And he goes, when I go to each city and I have an opportunity to touch upon some of the young youth that comes to the starting lines and I see these kids, you automatically create a fan today. And in our business, and the same thing with you, Avery, a fan today becomes a buyer of tomorrow. And cultivating that youth, it's crazy for me that as I have men and women walk through the door of all different ages or walks of life that tell me stories, And when they saw their first Countach, they saw their first Ferrari when they came to the dealership, and they were greeted by my grandfather, and he let them sit in a Corniche Rolls Royce. And at the time he said, you know, I promise one day when I make it, I'm going to come back and I'm going to be able to buy a car from you. And I can't imagine I can't begin to tell you how many people have come and told us those stories. So when we look at what the car community is and I got to tell you, just the mixing with youth and what these rallies are, and on top of the sprinkle of social media, it has created our world to be as big as a keyboard. We can connect with anybody. So on the art business, Avery, how do you feel that social media has changed your game?
I think it's the same. I mean, one of the biggest is art has never really been as much of a flex as it is now. You know, it was always a very kind of quiet wealth thing where people didn't even want you to know what art they had. You know, I always laugh, like the real rich people have their most expensive stuff hidden in their bedroom. And social media has absolutely changed that, where people suddenly are concerned with what's on their walls and they want to have something curated where people really turn their house into little mini museums where they're self-aware of every wall in their house. And that never used to be the case before social media.
I totally agree. And you, JT?
You know, I think I was actually going to ask you, what are your thoughts on he's having another conversation.
What's that? What?
Brett, did you guys hit the resto mod?
So I was actually going to ask you, you know, I look at, and I know nothing about the art world, so forgive me, but I was going to ask you what you thought about people like Swiss Beats and these guys that are bringing, what in my eyes, art to a mass community and a mass audience through social media. So I was just wondering your thoughts.
I think it's great. That's another thing we didn't touch about. It's basically the rise of collector influencers, where basically that's what I would consider Swiss Beats. He's essentially a collector influencer where he's buying serious art, but because of his following and the way he's presenting it, he's making it even cooler, right? Like Swiss Beats is one of the first people I know who worked with an architect and built his house around a specific cause sculpture. He has like a 14-foot wooden cause sculpture, and he worked with an architect and built the house around that sculpture. So again, I think that is what's driving the youth, because you get younger guys that follow him and they're like, man, when I grow up, I'm going to get a Warhol, or when I grow up, I'm going to save up, I'm going to buy a wooden cause. And I think it works with all of this stuff, cars, art. So I think that we're seeing the rise of collector influencers, both famous and also just wealthy entrepreneurs that are pushing the narrative that success is not just about money. It's not just about burning money at nightclubs and private jets. There's a way of doing it with class and style. And I'd say that's one of the things Swiss Beats has brought to culture.
I completely agree. And Swiss is a dear friend of the dealership, and to see his rise and what he's created is absolutely incredible, man. I totally agree. You know, John, and I think you'll appreciate this too, Gil, because we've talked about this in the past, but you know, your family has thousands of cars. You and your father have collected, and we have the museum here and in Orlando, and we've touched upon cars that are fully original. And then we've also touched upon the remakes of some of these original cars, not necessarily by the manufacturers, but by some of these resto mod companies. And you're a Porsche guy. So I have to tell you quickly about an experience that I just got back from California last week, and I was introduced to this unbelievable brand called Gunther Werks. And we are now the East Coast dealer. There's actually 3 dealers in the world, LA, Miami, and Japan. And what Gunther did by taking an iconic series in Porsche on the 934 and remaking the car, 993, excuse me, and remaking the car, and not remaking it just from wheels, exhaust, or slight aesthetics, but completely from ground up, restoring the vehicle to today's standards of performance, today's design elements, today's everything. I have never been more amazed with seeing a manufacturer like this created. What's your thought on this whole resto mod?
Resto mod has been happening since I know it, from the 80s, when they were taking 55 Chevy Bel Airs, 57 Chevy Bel Airs, and putting Corvette engines in there. And yeah, so what we learned in resto mods, if you really love the car and you want to drive it, it's an awesome thing. As far as a value proposition, I don't know if if it really holds the value or increases value as much as an absolute original. As we're talking about the scarcity of these things, and as with older cars, as there's less and less of them, you want to have it the way the manufacturer intended. That's what the idea. These cars and the Singer cars are also, they're selling for $1 million as Singers, right? I mean, they're going for stupid numbers, and it's the beautiful, classic, cool old Porsche that drives like a brand new car. I get it. If you're going to drive it every day, as a collector thing, I don't see it as a collector value today. I could be wrong, but the moral of the story is, though, with all the modern technology and the ability to go out and build your own chassis and everything else, they decided to go after an older chassis and go ahead and do that and modify it that way, because they see that, it's not built like they used to, right? And that's why they went ahead and do that stuff. And again, if you're going to drive it, those cars are incredible to drive. I remember one of my first Porsches, my third Porsche was a 911, but a 1993, which was one of these cars. And it was fun. It was stick shift. It was analog. There was no computers. You could spin the car around. It was a great time. And I'm sure that's what they're trying to bring back. As far as the newer cars go, they're just amazing to drive. The real question is, and asking you guys, from my standpoint, what is the segment? What is the next hot segment of investment grade automobiles to buy? Meaning, what I've noticed in my life, my father being a car collector, is that the hot market is always about 30 years behind us today, right? 30 to 40 years today. So here we are. I remember growing up 30 years ago when I was in high school, the cool cars were the Japanese cars. Whereas the Nissan 300ZX, the 3000 GT VR4, the NSX I know has gone up in value, the Supras. What's going to happen to all those Jap cars and where the value is going on? What's the buy today to looking forward to the future?
I think already, I mean, the Japanese cars have done insane numbers. I mean, you look at some of the really specific Nissan Skyline cars, Nismo, Nurspec, all those cars, they're very expensive. And I think even you could go online right now and look it up, a Integra Type R with no miles from 97, and it's going to be a $60,000, $70,000 car. So maybe double or triple what MSRP was originally. So I agree with you. I think the future, my opinion, is in the 90s. In addition to the 90s, I think it's also this last generation of combustion engine cars, last generation of manual transmission cars. And I think anything that made a statement, I look at some of the incredible tuner cars from the 90s and some of the cars like Rentec cars and Hennessey Vipers and stuff that they were on the cover of magazines. We recently, I got it for a client. It was one of the Callaway Speedster Corvettes. And they made 10 of those in 1992. They're insane. They were on the cover of all the magazines. And honestly, I helped him get the car. I didn't think it was a big deal. We find this car. It was pink on silver. It was a very famous show car. We post the car online, and people go nuts. Guys are calling me from around the country like, I remember that car when I was 10. I remember that car when I was 15. So I think it's things that make a big impact. I think you're 100% right. There's a massive future for Japanese cars. And to a certain extent, I think the end of a generation. I even look today, and even though we don't really buy and sell them, a 458 Speciale is an incredible car. It's the last of its kind. All of the new Ferraris, they're perfect, they're great, but to me, they're too perfect, and they're transportation, and they sort of lose the soul. I know you love the Chiron that starts up every time, but I think some of the other older cars do have a soul, even if I'm broken down on the side of the road.
That is true, I got to tell you. And that's one of the reasons why the resto mod becomes a liked item, because a lot of these individuals will look at a car and appreciate the look. But in today's time, they just got out of their Tesla, Benz, Beamer, Bentley, and the car drove and performed perfectly. So imagine if you had an opportunity to go back in time and recreate your own dream 993, you would go ahead and do it. And when you talk about a value perspective, and John, you and I were talking about this the other day, when you go back and see that a Gunther Werks coupe was 25 cars made for the world and had an MSRP of $650,000 for the remake. That vehicle just traded at RM for $1.55 million. It's absolutely bizarre. So when you think about and ask why, it's because that owner had an opportunity to harness this project, design this car with today's technology the way he wants it, and the car is a driver's car. And that's another thing. Just like Pagani, there's certain brands out there that they are not looking for an owner to go ahead and purchase a car and it become a garage queen or a trailer queen. They want these cars driven to perform and do exactly what they're meant to do. We see it with the older cars. And you have testicles larger than steel. When you did your first Countach rally, you took, I mean, brother, congratulations. How many cars were on that rally? 26 cars on that rally, brother. And you got guys with passion, heritage, and love and appreciation for their cars, where most of them didn't have air conditioning, and those that did, it's not BTUs like we have today, right? And they loved it. They appreciated it. But if we could go back and take that existing Countach and see what it would perform, that's what a lot of customers are looking at about when they talk about the Resto Mod. Their iconic design look with today's modern technology and modern performance. And I think, in my opinion, Gil, to answer what you were saying, I think you're going to find a lot of manufacturers, Ferrari, Lamborghini, Porsche included, are going to start doing it on their own in a sense. It might not have the same modern design and flair that some of the others. I am personally obsessed with Gunther, not just because of the engineering and my love for what I saw them create, but I also just appreciate the modern look and feel. So I think that is going to be the next forefront of the business. I feel a lot of the manufacturers are going to start creating their own bespoke elder cars. That's my 2 cents on that. Good. All right, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, I think you've heard enough from the Four Stooges up on stage. Give a round of applause for Gil Dezer, John Temerian, and Avery. I am beyond grateful to share the stage with you boys. From my personal relationships with you guys, having an opportunity to be up here was just incredible and ask you some great questions. I'm sorry for those that were loud in the back and for those that didn't have an opportunity to hear. Guys, once again, thank you for coming. I want to thank Dimitri for putting this on. I'll pass you the mic in 1 second. But I want to thank you for curating this, getting all of us together, putting all of us in this run room. You have our home anytime you ever want to do these. Mi casa, su casa, brother.
Thank you guys for coming. Thank you, Brett, for having us. It was a great time, great talk. We have some more drinks in the back. Happy birthday to Katya. It was the other day. Oh, no? That was it. And maybe next time we can all be a little bit quieter. So sorry, guys, but we'll keep trying.